Namaste and welcome to our channel, Indian History and Culture. Before we proceed to this discussion, please do not forget to like, share and subscribe our channel for getting regular updates on new videos and new stories from the history of India and its culture. Let us discuss about an era of the Indian freedom movement dominated by the trio of Lal, Bal and Pal, Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Bipin Chandra Pal. An interesting bit, in this Lal Bal Pal trio, which rhymes wonderfully and has been narrated to us from our school times, there is one extremist leader from Bengal whose name is often forgotten, but in fact who played a very important role in challenging the ideas and methods of the moderate leadership along with stalwarts like Lokmanya Tilak and Lala Lajpat Rai. The Bengali extremist leader that we often forget is Aurobindo Ghosh, who started criticism of the moderate methods and philosophies through a series of articles that were published under the title New Lamps for the Old. But the most important leader of all the extremists that come in the 1890s and the beginning part of the 20th century is perhaps a person called as Bal Gangadhar Tilak, popularly known and remembered as Lokmanya Tilak. Whenever we say Lokmanya Tilak or make a search of it on numerous search engines, the slogan that immediately pops up is Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it. A slogan which symbolized his philosophy and his participation in the first movement under the Congress leadership that would form in the form of Swadeshi movement. But the activism of Tilak began much before this. It was in the 1880s and 1890s that Tilak became a known face in the western part of India, and by the 1890s he had become more of a national figure. His contributions in the field of education are well known, with the establishment of numerous colleges and schools in and around Pune, to the belief that these extremist leaders shared that a new history or a new way of teaching history and Indian culture has to be imbibed. The history and culture that was being taught in the Indian schools at that time was from a British perspective, and we need to have a nationalist perspective to understand Indian history and culture. It is with this idea that he also started popularizing two festivals in the 1890s. One, which is a well-known one, is the Sarvajanik Ganesh Utsavs. But along with that, he also started the Shivaji Utsav. Now these festivals were started in order to assemble people together and spread the idea of political and national consciousness amongst the Indian masses, to unite them together in the struggle that would eventually be waged under the Congress banner for the independence of India. Now it is these festivals which not only became popular by themselves, but also led to the popularity of Lokmanya Tilak. The developments in the 1890s and the early 20th century in fact also influenced the philosophy of all these leaders, including Tilak. The events that were happening in Japan, the modernization of Japan after Meiji Restoration. Japan, which was on the verge of being colonized in 1853 after Commodore Perry had forced open Japanese ports, by the end of the 19th century had become an advanced and developed industrial nation, to the extent that it was now searching for colonies of its own. The rise of Japan after the Meiji Restoration became an inspiration to the Indian intelligentsia and the Indian leaders, particularly leaders like Lokmanya Tilak. The belief that we need to take pride in our own culture, we need to be self-reliant in order to rise as a strong and independent nation, inspired their politics and ideology. It is out of this inspiration and the inspiration that came from the Russian Revolution of 1905 that the activities of the extremists started. The principle of self-reliance of the Japanese inspired the first movement of India for its independence under the Congress. That was the Swadeshi movement, the belief in Swavalamban, self-reliance. If we develop our own national industries, our own national educational policies and boycotted the British Raj and the British products, the day would not be far where we became independent. Swaraj would be eventually achieved. It is with these ideas that Tilak, along with the other extremists, led the Swadeshi movement on a pan-India level. The Swadeshi movement gave impetus to the establishment of Indian industries and Indian businesses. In order to popularize the idea of producing goods in India and using goods that were made in India, Tilak started the Swadeshi Vastu Pracharini Sabha to spread consciousness about Indianness, about Indian identity, and also the belief in self-reliance. It resulted in a series of businesses that came to be established in India, whether it was the Swadeshi Steam Navigation Company, the first pharmaceutical and chemical company established in Bengal, whether it was the Swadeshi store, the Bombay store that came in the city of Mumbai, and numerous other educational institutions like the National College in Calcutta were all a product of these ideas and these beliefs. But when we talk about the Swadeshi movement, there's also the partitioning of Bengal that happened on religious grounds, which is in the background of it. The Swadeshi movement also led to a great schism between the moderates and the extremists. The extremists thought that they were becoming popular day by day and they were the ones who should take charge of the Congress leadership. The moderates, on the other hand, started believing that the extremists had progressed too far on the Swadeshi and the Swaraj agenda and we had to cool things off. This led to an ideological rivalry between these two factions, which eventually led to the Surat split of 1907. In Surat split, unruly scenes were witnessed. One story that is narrated but not sufficiently corroborated is that a chappal was thrown on the dais which missed prominent moderate leader Firoz Shah Mehta. This led to the permanent parting of the ways for the next decade or so between the moderates and the extremists. The Congress became more or less irrelevant under the moderate leadership, and the extremist leaders were chased by the British Empire. In 1908, there was a famous sedition case that was filed against Lokmanya Tilak, after which he was sentenced to 6 years rigorous imprisonment in the Mandale jail. It is in this sedition trial that he had famously proclaimed that Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it. But this famous sedition case is interesting for one more fact and for one more story. Though Lokmanya Tilak has fought the case on his own, he had taken the legal advice from Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Jinnah was also to defend Tilak a few years later in another sedition trial. The name of Jinnah is remembered in India and in Indian history as the man who divided India, a communal figure. But there is an altogether different story about the role of Jinnah prior to his joining the Muslim League and prior to becoming the leader that we know him today.